Welcome. Hi. Got a little fan club here, it seems like. Thank you all for coming out. If you don't know me, I'm Dr. Mark Cheatham. I'm the Heller Family Professor of History here at Cumberland, and I'm also Project Director for the paper's Martin Van Buren. This is our Cynthia Van Buren lecture. We do a lecture in the spring semester with one of our staff members on the Van Buren papers, and then in the fall semester we invite an outside speaker who's an expert on Van Buren or that era to come speak. So come back in the fall. We don't yet know who's going to be speaking in the fall, but please, we encourage you to attend as many lectures as you can. I want to give you a little bit of background on our project if you're not familiar with it, which I know many of you are, and then talk a little bit about Cynthia, who's our benefactor for this lecture series. So we actually officially launched this project 10 years ago today on February 16th, 2016, which was President's Day. We had a nice celebration this afternoon. We had 11 former students who had worked on the project come back and had a little family reunion. They were asking me for money like I was their father. I'm not sure. I didn't like that part of the family reunion, but the photos and catching up was great. So what we do here at the Van Buren papers is we transcribe, digitize, and make accessible to the public the papers of our 8th president, Martin Van Buren. And you may be thinking, how did Martin Van Buren wind up in Middle Tennessee? It's a long story. But this project began 10 years ago officially. Over the past 10 years, we have done tremendous work, aided by a lot of our student workers in particular, as well as our full-time staff members. And we're just super excited to be able to share part of that research with you tonight through our speaker, Dr. Andrew Wiley, who I'll mention more about in just a minute. But first, let me talk about Cynthia Van Buren. Several years ago, Stacy Galentine had the opportunity, when she was VP of Advancement here at Cumberland, to meet with Cynthia, who was part of the Van Buren Family Foundation. So Cynthia and her brother and sister had formed a foundation in honor of their parents, and Stacy went down to talk to Cynthia. We'd had some initial communications with her, but went down to talk with her, and they had a great time. Stacy didn't share the details of what they did on the yacht. I don't want to know. That's my go-to joke, Stacy, just so you know. But it was such a great experience that when Cynthia unfortunately passed away in 2020, she gave our project an estate gift, which helps to fund this lecture series, helps to fund our student internships, and has just been a great, tremendous blessing to our project and to our university. So we're very grateful for Cynthia. We're grateful for the fact that she saw something in our project, in our university, that was worth giving part of her estate to. And you can see her memory living on here today, tonight, in this lecture series. So thank you, Cynthia. And a lot of the students who were here this afternoon, by the way, benefited from her estate as well. And so that's another way that her memory lives on. Tonight's speaker is Dr. Andrew Wiley. So one of the great privileges that I have in doing the spring lecture series is I get to introduce close friends. Usually the people we bring in the fall are people I know, but they're not close friends. They're not people I've worked with. I've worked with Andrew, Dr. Wiley, since 2018. He was our first full-time editorial hire on the project. I had questions about him. He came to us from Indiana by way of the University of Calgary, where he finished his PhD. So that was already 2 strikes against him, Indiana and Western Canada. He then told me he was a Pittsburgh Penguins fan. And so any of you who love hockey and love the Nashville Predators know that the Pittsburgh Penguins are not our favorite team. They're like right below the Detroit Red Wings, probably, and the Chicago Blackhawks. But in any case, Andrew brought a wealth of experience to the project. He had worked on the Frederick Douglass papers. He had worked as an editorial assistant on Civil War history, which is one of the major journals on Civil War history that's in our field. And he has been just a tremendous, tremendous help to me in providing stability to the project and to me in particular. One of the things I consistently write on his evaluations that I send to our dean is I never have to worry about things when Andrew's there. He's consistent. He will go above and beyond anything that I ask him to do. He'll do extra. If you have him in class, which I know some of his students are here, you know he's funny. He's knowledgeable about pop culture. He and Dr. Mathern, the other full-time editor, know so much more about pop culture than I do. It's kind of shameful, really. I just say I'm old. I don't keep up with all that stuff. But in any case, Andrew is a great person. He's a great scholar. We were hoping to announce that his new book was coming out, but we're that close to it being official. It's coming out in the spring 2027. Okay, brand new information. Do you have a title? Okay, I'll let you talk about that. He has a new book coming out on Indiana conservatives in the Civil War era. And his talk tonight is on a topic that sort of relates to that in the sense that it's in the same era. He's going to be talking about the 1848 presidential election and Martin Van Buren's role in that. And he's going to be bringing to this talk a lot of his experience, not just as a Civil War era expert, but also his work on the Van Buren papers. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew Wiley to the stage to deliver his talk.
I was just looking at the pictures, and that one that was up there was just after I got here, and dear God, did I need to grow a beard. So all right. Unfortunately, we're going to talk about Van Buren, but sort of obliquely tonight. So tonight, we're going to talk about two main political parties. Much of U.S. history, the United States has had two main political parties. You get the first party system, Democratic Republicans versus Federalists. You get the second party system, Whigs versus Democrats. Then you get the third party system, Democrats and Republicans, and their policies change, but the names stay the same. And in the middle of this, you get this messy rearrangement of parties, and things are sort of up in the air, and politics are very unsettled. However, recent historians have looked back and they've noticed that between 1836 and the 1880s, that time in politics was tumultuous. You had the Liberty Party that was formed, then the Free Soil Party, which we'll talk about tonight, the Republican Party, the Know Nothing Party, the Union Party, which was an attempt to form a new party, and Liberal Republican Party, all in that span of time. So I'm going to argue tonight that the truth of the matter is somewhere in the middle, that yes, politics in the 19th century, the 1800s, were tumultuous, but they did feature two main political parties. And tonight we're going to talk about how one of those new third parties, the Free Soil Party, tried to work around the system of two main political parties. And as a side note, a lot of this research emerged out of conversations that I and Dr. Mathern regularly exchange in class. So I have to give him a plug right there, all right? So why did people, especially Northerners, want to form a new political party in 1848? And the reason is Mexico. Mexico and the war with Mexico. In 1846, President James K. Polk sent troops into disputed territory that invited a violent response, and now the United States is at war with Mexico in 1846. Already, even before the war is settled or it looks like the United States might win, they're already debating on what to do with these new lands the United States expects that they might take from Mexico. Question is, are they going to be free, or are they going to allow slavery in these new lands? That's what's going on. So this debate goes into Congress. James K. Polk is going to request an appropriation bill in 1846. He's going to request an appropriation bill, and a Pennsylvania congressman, David Wilmot, is going to try to attach a proviso and say that any land we take from Mexico is going to be free territory. No slavery is going to allow it there, going to go there. Southerners in Congress reject this. especially in the Senate, and they have a way of neutralizing this in the Senate. So the Wilmot Proviso does not get through Congress, And this debate over whether this new territory is going to be free or is it going to be slave continues on. And it goes into 1848. As the war comes to an end, in 1848, the United States signs the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. For those of you taking notes, I'll spell it out a little later. And they signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and the United States seizes much of northern Mexico. The question is this going to be free territory? Is this going to be slave territory? Is slavery going to be permitted there? The two main political parties do not want to touch this issue. The reason is Whigs and Democrats, the two main political parties in 1848, have northern and southern branches. If the Whigs come out and say, hey, slavery can't go there, we don't believe it should go into what is now going to be the Southwest, they might lose southern members. Democrats the same. So both parties come up with ways to getting around this controversy. The Democrats in 1848 are going to nominate a Michigander, Lewis Cass. Michigan is always very useful if you're from Indiana because here's Michigan, you can say you're from here. So they're going to nominate Michigander Lewis Cass, and he says popular sovereignty, that you should give settlers in these new territories a vote on whether they want to allow slavery or not. You should give them a vote. The Whigs are going to nominate Zachary Taylor. He's a war hero, and Zachary Taylor did something that was very useful for his party, and what he did is he shut up. He didn't talk a lot about politics. So northern Whigs could go around and say, hey, you vote for Zachary Taylor, guess what? He's going to give you future free territory. He's going to keep slavery out of the Southwest. Southern Whigs can go around and say, hey, he's a slave owner. He's going to expand slavery. If you're a Democrat in the North, what you say is, hey, we're going to have a lot of people go into the Southwest. They're going to vote to ban slavery, so you don't have to worry about it. If you're a Southern Democrat, you say, hey, we're going to have a lot of people go into the Southwest, and they're going to vote to prohibit slavery. If you're a voter, if you're a Northerner, especially a Northerner who wants a concrete prohibition on slavery in the Southwest, neither of these two main political parties is really going to meet that want. And so a lot of Northerners are going to decide maybe we should join our own and start a new political party. All right? For those of you who are taking notes, that is how that is spelled. So I still can't leave, even though this is not one of my classes, I still can't leave my professor hat off for too long. Right. The Free Soil Party is actually going to grow out of a split among Democrats in 1848. And the split is because of the Democratic Party of New York. Democrats are going to hold their national convention in the summer of 1848, and New York is going to send two delegations. One of these delegations is a bunch of delegates who are going to go in and they say, we want to keep slavery out of the territories. We want to keep slavery. We want a congressional prohibition on slavery in these new territories that we've just taken from Mexico. Another group is going to say, maybe we should stick with popular sovereignty. The National Democratic Party doesn't really know how to settle this. They do not really know how to settle this. So they admit half of the delegates who say, we want slavery prohibited, and the other half who say, yes, we'll go along with this popular sovereignty. Much of the New York delegation decides they are going to walk out, and they do so. And most of these guys are friends with our friend, Martin Van Buren, or at least the guy we study extensively at the Van Buren papers. They are friends of Martin Van Buren. So these Democrats go to Buffalo later in the year, August of 1848, and they form a new political party, the Free Soil Party. For a while, they call it the Free Soil Democratic Party. Some of them start calling it that. and they are going to nominate an old hand, Martin Van Buren, for president. They're going to nominate Charles Francis Adams, the grandson of John Adams, as vice president. So you have a former president and the grandson of a president running as a third party ticket. The Free Soilers know that this is going to be an uphill climb. They know, and they realize pretty quickly, that if they're going to beat Zachary Taylor, the Whig, or they're going to beat Lewis Cass, the Democrat, something's going to have to go right. They're almost going to have to draw an inside straight. Those of you who play poker or know about poker, you'll be familiar with that. So they're going to have to draw an inside straight. At first, what they want to do is they're hoping that Van Buren is going to draw off anti-slavery Democrats and anti-slavery Whigs, and they're going to unite behind Van Buren, and they're going to vote Van Buren in, and he's going to be the new president. That is one of their first strategies. In fact, supporters of Van Buren, Free Soil supporters, print long lists throughout August of what the vote was in 1844, and they say, okay, these many Democrats are probably anti-slavery, these many Whigs are probably anti-slavery, they're northern, those in the north, and they will rally behind Martin Van Buren and the Free Soil Party. And with that, Van Buren is probably going to win. Despite that hope, it becomes apparent pretty quickly in August 1848 that anti-slavery Whigs and anti-slavery Democrats are staying with their two main parties. They are staying with their main political parties. They're not going behind Van Buren. So the Free Soilers need another strategy if they expect to win. And this is where they look back to the 12th Amendment. The 12th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The 12th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified in 1804, and it was ratified in order to resolve a lot of the issues left over from the 1787 Constitutional Convention. Originally, whoever came first in the Electoral College became president. When electors meet, they would cast votes. Whoever came first in that vote tally was president. Now, this is not my class, so I can't ask questions or things like that like I normally would, but whoever came second was vice president, even if those people did not agree. In 1796, what happened is John Adams receives the most electoral votes in the Electoral College. He becomes president. Thomas Jefferson receives the second most votes in the Electoral College. He becomes vice president. And quickly, these guys realize, Jefferson and Adams, they do not get along. They are ideologically opposite. In fact, Jefferson is going to spend much of his term as vice president publishing letters against John Adams, the president. So Congress and politicians realize that if you have this event happen again, you could get a situation where you have ideological opposites as president and vice president. So in 1804, they ratify, Congress passes and the states ratify the 12th Amendment. And what the 12th Amendment stipulates is that the electors will vote on the president and the vice president separately. So you no longer have to worry about ideological opposites, or at least you hope ideological opposites do not become president and vice president. What the Free Soil men in 1848 are really interested in is this part of the 12th Amendment. And if no person have such majority, then from the persons having the highest numbers not exceeding 3 on the list of those voted for as president, the House of Representatives shall choose immediately by ballot the president. That's very fancy talk. What that means is that if you have a presidential election and no candidate receives a majority, not a plurality, a majority in the Electoral College, the election goes into the House of Representatives. And it will be the representatives that choose who becomes president. All the states get a vote. Each state had one vote. Even if New York had 34 representatives in the House, it only had one vote. So that means if an election, presidential election happens, and nobody gets a majority, the top 3 vote getters go into the House of Representatives. This happens in 1824, when you have John C. Calhoun, he later drops out, Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, Crawford, and then you have John Quincy Adams as well. All of them are running for president. The top 3 vote getters, because none of them get a majority, goes into the House, and the representatives elect John Quincy Adams. That's how the president. He did not get a majority in the Electoral College, yet he becomes president. The Free Soil men in 1848 look at this as their way, since this expected groundswell of anti-slavery support does not go towards Van Buren, that maybe in 1848, nobody's going to get a majority. This election's going to go into the House of Representatives, and maybe everybody is going to decide, the representatives there are going to decide that Van Buren is our guy, as sort of a compromise. That's their hope. And this is going to sustain them through much of the latter part of the 1848 campaign. Why don't Free Soil voters just finally say, oh, we just give up? And it's because a lot of them are relying on the 12th Amendment. Even before the Free Soil Party nominated Van Buren, there was already talk of there being 3 major candidates in the race in 1848. In fact, somebody from Alabama, and I put this in because I thought Dr. McKee would be here, but unfortunately he cannot be. A person from Alabama even bet that nobody in 1848 was going to get a majority in the Electoral College, it was going to go into the House, and that it would be the representatives who picked the president that year. So even before the Free Soil Party officially holds a convention and officially nominates someone, there's already talk that the representatives in the House will decide who is going to be the president. So this opportunity that the 12th Amendment provides is a fresh breath of fresh air for a lot of Free Soil voters. A lot of Free Soil voters. In fact, shortly after the Free Soil Convention in Buffalo, in late August, in Cincinnati, Ohio, a Free Soil man is actually going to talk about the election is going to go into the House, and Van Buren is somehow going to win it. He actually says, we shall carry New York, Massachusetts, Maine, and Wisconsin, and then maybe Ohio. And if Van Buren wins all those states, that means no one wins a majority. And so what this man says, this Free Soil man says, is he says, let it go into the House, and Martin Van Buren will come out into the presidential chair. He expects that. Some Democrats are actually alarmed at this. Some Democrats are actually alarmed by this. There is a concern that maybe the election is going to go into the House, and then who knows what's going to happen. In fact, Thomas Ritchie, a former friend of Martin Van Buren, he turns into a political rival. He is actually going to talk about what is going to happen if the representatives decide the House, decide the president. And so what Thomas Ritchie goes out, he's a hardcore Democrat, and he goes out talking to people, and he says, don't worry about Van Buren, stick behind Cass. We've got to get Cass over the line. So even though he's still confident that Lewis Cass is going to win, Thomas Ritchie believes that there is a chance the House might decide who is going to be the president in 1848. The people who are most concerned about the possibility of an election in the House are the Whigs. The Whigs are really concerned about this. They are concerned that a lot of their voters might go for Van Buren instead, and it might prevent Zachary Taylor, their guy, from getting a majority in the Electoral College. One Whig in Vermont is actually going to say, if you vote for Van Buren, you are essentially throwing away your vote. The reason why he says this is because in the House of Representatives, Democrats controlled most of the state delegations. So if it goes into the House, the likely outcome is that Lewis Cass is going to be elected president. Whigs use this as a way to try to keep some of their voters who are curious about this new third party in line. Do not vote for Van Buren. If you do, and even if it goes into the House of Representatives, that means a Democrat, Lewis Cass, is going to become president. Van Buren's supporters actually have a rebuttal to that. They say, get it into the House, and Van Buren is going to work his magic. He's known as the little magician, after all. He is going to work his magic, and it doesn't matter that Democrats control a majority of these state delegations. Somehow, he will win over enough people to become a president. An election is still possible. Stick behind Van Buren. I'm talked about rank and file members of the Free Soil Party, but where's the evidence that some of the party leaders actually believe that this was a good strategy? And we do have it, thanks to the papers of Martin Van Buren. In late October, a Free Soil convert named Francis Preston Blair Sr., those of you who worked in the Van Buren papers are probably shuddering right now because Francis Preston Blair Sr. has some of the worst handwriting known to man. So, Francis Preston Blair Sr., he's a friend of Van Buren, and in late October 1848, he is still making a prediction. He had abandoned the Democratic Party, and he had thrown his lot in behind Van Buren, and this was his quote. I calculate on the election coming to the House. So this is an experienced, seasoned political observer who is saying that no one is going to win a majority in the Electoral College, and it's going to be the representatives in the House that are going to pick the president, after all. Van Buren is receiving these letters, and if you want to know more about Van Buren's motivations for running as a Free Soil candidate, please read James M. Bradley's book, Martin Van Buren, First Politician. That's where you'll learn a lot about his personal motivations. But this idea of the election going into the House keeps a lot of Free Soil men behind Van Buren, even in the face of certain defeat. As the election approached, going into November of 1848, Free Soil men once again start talking about the 12th Amendment to the Constitution. There is a supporter in Albany, New York, right down the road from where Van Buren lived, who says that Van Buren and his friends are coming up with calculations on how the election will assuredly go into the House and how the representatives in the House of Representatives will pick Van Buren. The Free Soil man from Albany said, don't pay any heed to those Whigs and those Democrats who are predicting certain defeat for Martin Van Buren. Somehow he is going to come out as the winner of this election. The day before the presidential election, in November, the day before the presidential election, one of Van Buren's longtime friends wrote the former president about the political situation. His name was Gorham Aikenworth. He'd known Van Buren for decades at this point. And he admitted that his friend's chances were low, that it was unlikely that Van Buren would win the presidency outright. He did acknowledge he did not like Cass or Taylor, yet he noted that local and state elections in several states indicated that Taylor would very likely win. He would very likely win a majority outright. Regardless of who won, Worth actually said that if there is a large vote for Van Buren, it'll show Southerners that there are enough Northerners up here committed to anti-slavery. That even if you fail, you will win in that regard. even if you fail. You will show a lot of Southerners that there are Northerners committed to anti-slavery. Even though he's already talking like this, might still be a forlorn hope, he turns back to the 12th Amendment. And he says, if it goes into the House, if no one wins a majority in the Electoral College, I believe you will be the person to make enough deals in the House and come out the winner. So what happened? Unfortunately for Martin Van Buren, this is not exactly. The problem for this plan was that Van Buren needed to win several states. As you can see, he wins no votes in the Electoral College. Zachary Taylor is actually the winner. Zachary Taylor is the winner. And he is the winner because a lot of Whigs in the North, because Taylor had said very little, they can say, yeah, that's our guy. Even though he is a slave owner, somehow he's going to keep slavery from going into the Southwest. So a lot of these Northern Whigs, instead of going to Van Buren, and a lot of Northern Democrats, instead of going to Van Buren and giving him any state in the Electoral College, stick with their parties. They stick with their parties. Despite that, it is the 12th Amendment to the Constitution. It is not because of the 12th Amendment that the Free Soil Party is launched. It is not because of the 12th Amendment that necessarily Van Buren decides he wants to run for the presidency again in 1848. It is because of the 12th Amendment that a lot of Free Soil men decide to stay in the game. They decide that, yes, if we just get this election into the House, that somehow Van Buren, thanks to the 12th Amendment, will become President of the United States again. Even though it didn't happen, the 12th Amendment is a partial reason why politics in the 19th century were a lot more chaotic than just two main political parties duking it out every election. Thank you.
So if you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll come to you with a microphone and you can ask a question of Dr. Wiley. As always, we're going to prioritize questions from students, but if anyone has a question, let me know by raising your hand.
Is it current or former students included in that?
Any student. Well, yeah. Ethan McCarter.
Full legal name over here.
The man with the Montgomery Biscuits cap.
So when they switched their strategy to the 12th Amendment, did they start switching their campaign style towards campaigning towards the House members rather than the general public?
Not yet, because they still had to campaign for the general public, because the whole thing still relied on Van Buren winning a few states. He still had to get a few states to deprive anybody else of a majority, so it'll go into the House of Representatives. They just predict that somehow the little magician is going to be able to somehow go in and somehow win over or sway a lot of these representatives behind him. So they haven't got to that point. That's the hope. They still got to win over some of the public, which they do not, unfortunately, for Van Buren.
Other questions?
Is that a student?
President Stone was also a student at one time, just like Dr. Mason.
Thank you, Dr. Wiley. Great talk, very interesting. My question is, if it had gone to the House of Representatives, and the stipulation in the 12th Amendment is that they shall choose immediately, how are the states, for example, a state like New York that had maybe 34 electoral votes, how did they pick just one? Did they have to do that internally voting then, or because that could take some time? I mean, that might not be immediate.
Yeah. They would have to debate and deliberate on that, which is what happened in 1824. That's a great question. In Ethan's, yours was a great question too. But in 1824, that is what happened. I try to show no partiality. But in 1824, that's what happened. And that's how John Quincy Adams becomes president. These delegations come together and they start debating over who they're going to pick. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of Whigs say, hey, if you get it thrown into the House, what does that matter? Lewis Cass is going to win, since a majority of state delegations are controlled by Democrats. Even though Free Soil men don't want to talk about that, they don't necessarily want to deal with that. That's step 2 of the plan. But yes, they are thinking about that, and it does take time.
So this is a counterfactual question. Let's say that Van Buren won enough to throw it into the House. And I hear your point about there being Democratic majorities in enough states to probably elect Cass. How is Van Buren going to make these deals? How is he going to be the little magician to pull off this great political trick that would somehow put him back into the White House?
As one of my students here will get this analogy, since it involves golf. Thank you for teeing that up. So anyway, how he's going to make this deal, there are 30 states at the time. 15 are controlled by Democrats. 15 of these delegations are controlled by Democrats. 12 are controlled by Whigs. 3 are evenly divided. And that's where Free Soil men say, maybe he can cut a deal. Maybe these people sometimes, even like Delaware, which is a slave state, maybe Delaware, there's still some friends of Van Buren who might say, hey, you know, he was president once. He didn't blow up the country. He nearly did, economically, but he didn't blow up the country. Let's give him another shot. That's what they think.
Yeah, and I wonder if also maybe some of them were still upset about Van Buren losing the Democratic Party's nomination in '44, and so this is their opportunity to get their revenge, where he went from what seemed to be the clear nominee to losing in '48. He could maybe switch that around and come out of the ashes and rise up like the phoenix. You're welcome. Rise up like the phoenix and make his way back into the White House.
You seem to know about the 1844 election. Have you written something on that?
Maybe. We did not plan this little riff here, I promise.
I do. So it may be, I may be the only one in the audience, but I struggle with reading this 12th Amendment. To me, the wording is just really ambiguous. When I first read that, I read it to say, from the persons having the highest numbers not exceeding 3, meaning the 3 votes. I find it really an odd wording. I just wonder if I'm the only one that sees that as sort of.
Maybe. But if they were like 1804 congressional people. So what that means is, like, say 1824, you have 5 candidates in the race. John C. Calhoun bows out, so you're down to 4. Okay. The top 3 vote getters in the election. Yeah, no. What happens is, if nobody gets a majority. Okay.
It's a simple majority.
Oh, if nobody gets a majority, then only the top 3 vote getters in the Electoral College go into the House of Representatives. So that's what happens. So Henry Clay in 1824 is not one of the top 3. So when the representatives start considering who's going to be president, he gets left off because he came in 4th in the election. Does that answer your question? But yes, that is decidedly legalese, and that is verbatim what it says.
Other questions? Catherine Wright? Well, you can tell the students I have in my classes because I know their full names. And interns, yes.
I kind of have 2 questions. Why was his nickname the Little Magician? And then in like a hypothetical scenario, could this strategy of preventing a majority work in like a modern electoral sense, or if things potentially changed within the electoral, process too much?
He got his nickname, the Little Magician, because of his ability to make those backroom deals in the early foundations of the Democratic Party and to help build the political party. He was also 5'8", so on me, that's about right here. So, so he was short, so he was the little magician. At the White House, he would frequently take 2 steps at a time going upstairs to try to exaggerate his height. So, could this happen in today's world? It theoretically could. It theoretically could. It could happen in today's world. And it would go into the House of Representatives. It seems like every 4 years, there is talk about this happening, the possibility of this happening. Is it likely? No, but it is possible. So, does that answer your question?
Thank you. Can you speak more on the 1948 New York Democrat delegations? Was it like, is it clear their intentions were to kind of blow up this thing? Did they send a double amount of delegates? Did they split their regular number of delegates into the 2 different groups?
Yeah. So what happens is they send delegates. The Democratic Party in New York sends delegates. So you have decided one group that they're nicknamed the Barn Burners. They decidedly do not want slavery going out west, and most of them want to vote to nominate Van Buren himself. Many of them want to nominate Van Buren. The other group, the Hunkers, they decide they're going to go in there. Yes, I love that name, the Hunkers. But they decide they're going to go in there. They're going to support what the Democratic Party wants. So both of these groups know what they're going to try to do when they get in there. That the Barn Burners want somebody who is going to say, no, slavery cannot go. The Hunkers basically say, okay, the main Democratic Party's fine, we'll go along with these. So that's what they want to do. So the Democratic Party, the National Convention decides they're going to split the difference, admit half and admit half. And of course, the Barn Burners decide, no, we don't want it. They start walking out when they know Van Buren cannot win the nomination, and it's unlikely anybody else other than Cass is going to win the nomination. Does that answer your question?
So this is not my field, so excuse this question if it shows lack of intelligence. And plus, I was born just after 1840, so I don't remember this. But nowadays, we have a decent portion of sort of non-voters and independents, and you had said that they were thinking about pulling from mostly the 2 parties, and that's who they were hoping to get for this 3rd group. Were they thinking they'd also pull from those other groups, or is that not really much of a thing then as it is now, or was it more? I don't know, proportion-wise.
That is an excellent question. So their main hope is to pull from anti-slavery Whigs and anti-slavery Democrats. They also hope to pull from the Liberty Party. The Liberty Party, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, was formed in 1839. It says, hey, we need to get rid of slavery everywhere, not just stop it going west. And so there's an expectation among Free Soilers that these Liberty Party people are going to vote for Van Buren. And so they believe that. They also believe and hope that there might be a groundswell out there of non-voters, people that just need a candidate to get them into the game. And the Free Soil men actually do get a lot of non-voters. Yeah, the non-voting thing, it's always a thing. Although I could digress about there's also a belief of the undecided swing voter, and there's a belief in that, but always, hey, we just need to get some more people from to the polls is always a thing. That there's a bunch of people out there who do not vote. We just need to get them and motivate them correctly.
And just to add to that, the problem in this period is that the voter participation rate is so high. So in 1840, it was over 80%. It drops down in 44 and 48, and then jumps back up. But you're talking 75, 78% of voters who can vote are voting. So there's not a huge number of those voters who are out there, and maybe enough to get Van Buren into the House for an election, but probably not enough to win him the election himself.
No. And there's also, yes, it is high voter participation at least, but there is a tendency in the census at this time to undercount, meaning that you send out census workers, they say these many people are here, they are voters, they are eligible, but they might miss a bunch of people. So even though you have high voter participation of people who appear on the census, there's a question of how many of these other people were left out because they weren't home when the census taker went by. So there is the possibility out there that there might be a bunch of other people out there who could rally and vote as well.
President Stump had another question.
Well, can you comment on who, at this point in history, who were the eligible voters? Women were not.
No.
But was the voting age 18? How were voting credentials? I mean, that's still an issue today, but how were voters eligible or credentialed to be able to vote back then?
In most states, 21 was the age. In most states, there's also, in many states, African Americans could not vote. In New York, they had to meet certain property requirements in order to vote. There are some New England states who are going to open. They're going to open suffrage to some African Americans. In fact, Ohio is going to start opening up the vote to people of mixed ethnicity. They're going to vote open to people of mixed ethnicity. So the voting electorate is dramatically smaller than what it is today. And so how they register is frequently there wasn't really a formal registration system in each state. And in fact, in most states, how you voted was you would walk up to the person behind the counter and you would shout out who you were going to vote for in front of everybody. Everybody. And sometimes people would challenge a person, hey, this person isn't eligible to vote, they don't live around here, they don't do stuff like that. But they do appear, there are some states and some areas that have voter rolls, that have precinct rolls. So they can keep a track of who is moved in here, are they eligible to vote. But you're voting in front of everybody. You shout out your choice, and then the person behind the counter takes that down.
It's very squishy, very squishy.
We'll get to you, Fee.
So, as vice president for Andrew Jackson, he is couched as being the northern man with southern sympathies, aka I'm not going to mess with slavery. By the time he gets here, he is a free soiler. Does that hurt him in this with either his own free soil party or with everyone around, aka those in the House? What in the world happened?
So it does hurt him with people in the Free Soil Party, the fact that he had given so much cover for slavery throughout much of his career. In fact, Salmon P. Chase, later Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in 1864, Secretary of the Treasury under Lincoln, is actually going to write, he's going to lead a delegation, why are you now a free soil, why are you anti-slavery, against slavery spreading west, if you have been this way for your entire political career? In fact, Southerners who had supported him are going to write him very angry letters. Peter Vivian Daniel, I believe, is one of them, who writes letters, what are you talking about? You have been totally blasé about this, and now you're against slavery. How dare you say this? Like I said, if you want to know Van Buren's motivations, at least the way James M. Bradley says, you'll have to read that book. Man, I'm plugging a lot of books today. Not even my own, but you'll have to read that book. But there is an angry reaction, and it does hurt him in the Free Soil Party, at least at the beginning. By late August, by September, they're like, yeah, he's fine, and if he dies, then Charles Francis Adams becomes president, and that's just as good. So. Oh yes, I am protecting Midwestern institutions, race, economics, suffrage, and conservatism in Civil War era Indiana. Just rolls off the tongue.
All right, B has a question, I think.
Yeah, this is, I guess, tangentially related to the question just before, but can you expound a little bit on the broader platform of the Free Soil Party, or were they purely just banking on name recognition, maybe that's put a little crudely, but name recognition of Martin Van Buren and anti-slavery going west, or did they have any substantial views economically, sociologically, you know?
One of the things that they do talk about, they borrow a lot from Jacksonian views against monopolies. They say that slave owners' slavery, it creates a monopoly against free laborers. Now, when they say free laborers, they mean white free laborers. So they borrow some of that, but they want to contain slavery. They're not talking about like getting rid of it intentionally, but it's mainly an anti-slavery party. It's mainly an anti-slavery party. They do want tariffs to a certain extent. They do, or some of them want free trade, but they're mainly focused on anti-slavery.
We have time for one more question. Yeah, Tyler. I won't use your last name since I'm getting flack for this.
That's so nice of you. All right, super quick question. Let's just say super hypothetical. If like all the things aligned to have him win his states, he's able to gain those 4 states. If it did win to the House, what is this hypothetical answer? Could he win the House if it did go to the House? Could he?
Theoretically, yes.
Sure.
Likely, no.
All right.
Lewis Cass probably becomes president. Probably. But this is unfortunately unlike some of the people here in other disciplines, I can't go back and rerun the 1848 election. So I can't rerun. I thought I would have that power when I was a PhD, but I can't change the past. So.
All right, Dr. Mathern, you get the last word.
Oh boy.
All right, Andrew, you and I are in the office 5 days a week, so I could ask you about this any day, but I'm choosing to ask you about it right now in front of hundreds of people.
I'm so lucky. I'm so fortunate.
So the question I'm going to ask, it's going to be inviting you to think a little bit beyond what the empirical evidence says, what the quotes in the letters say. When I ask, how serious do you think Van Buren was about this election, winning and governing again? And here's the reason I ask. You're right, they're seizing on this strategy that they saw inadvertently deployed in 1824, where John Quincy Adams wins the presidency without actually winning the Electoral College. It's chosen in a House contingency election. But Van Buren remembered that John Quincy Adams' victory was a catastrophe for John Quincy Adams. That meant that he entered the presidency with no popular mandate, limited congressional support. He was a lame duck upon arrival, and he basically handed his enemies a pro-democracy slogan to rally against Adams's cause, why he's a second one-term president. Van Buren, if this had worked out, if he had managed to clinch victory from the jaws of defeat and score some win through the for the House of Representatives, he would have had even less of a mandate, and he would have had no members of his own party in Congress to work with him, which would have meant that he had been the most impotent president in American history. So that's why I ask, was Van Buren really serious about any of this, do you think, considering that?
Van Buren, it is hard to, he would have had one. There is one, there's, I think, 1 or 2 Free Soil men who actually win in 1848. So he would have had 2. He wouldn't have been starting from nothing. But Van Buren himself, it's hard to tell. He likely knew that. His seriousness about this, like I said, James Bradley writes a lot about that, as you know. But the people behind him aren't really thinking that far in advance. They are just, okay, we want this to happen now. This is the best way we might get to contain slavery. We want this to happen now. We'll figure out what comes next afterward. Van Buren, you're probably right. He probably says, okay, I'm a lame duck from the word go. I can't get any of this done. But the people who support him are just thinking about how do we get it into the House? And when we get it into the House, after that, that's the next step. And then if he wins in that unlikely event, or if it does happen, we'll figure that out later. Yeah.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Wiley again. We appreciate your time. Thank you for coming out on what was a much better evening than 2 or 3 weeks ago in the ice storm. If you're here as a student and you're here for credit, there's a sheet of paper over to my left that you can sign. Otherwise, enjoy your evening, and we hope to see you again in the fall.